Hey, converted man here. The best evidence for God? Here's what 100 apologists said. Well, thanks for rounding them up. I'm sure that we'll have plenty of evidence, and by evidence, you mean arguments. And by arguments, you mean bad arguments. I can't wait. Oh, he's got them all in one place, and the video is 10 minutes long. Less than 10 minutes long. Ah, man. What the? Really? Is that short? Okay. I mean, maybe it's so short because they condensed everything to one simple, here's the evidence. Here you go. No. I mean, argument or whatever. Okay. So who do we got? Let's hear.
All of them totally took me by surprise. We're going to look at 5 categories from the least cited to the most cited, most popular, and highlight some crucial apologists along the way. We're also going to look at why Os Guinness and Doug Groteis wouldn't answer my question. Let's start with the smallest category, which I've dubbed existential. These are kind of personal encounters or experiences with God. So for example, this is one that surprised me. The great John Lennox said
The great John Lennox. What does he got? 50 publications to his name over a span of several years. Apparently that's decent for a mathematician, but he gave up. He stopped doing that. He stopped producing any work that could benefit humanity and retired and moved on to apologetics, where he rides his own coattails to make himself appear authoritarian. I'm a scientist. It's like, whatever, man. His arguments are nothing. They're big old giant nothing burgers. He doesn't impress me even a little. And that's hard to do when the guy is so big.
A transformed life, he considers the best evidence for the existence of God. So think about that. Oxford professor, science and philosophy and religious background, says a changed life is the most powerful piece of evidence for God.
So a changed life is a good way to know what is true, according to this idiot. That's interesting. So anybody's changed life, well, for the better, is then proof that something is true. So every religion is true then, and every cult is true then, and every group that helps you recover is true, and the amount of things that would be true is ridiculous at that point. And atheism would also be true, because for many people, being an atheist or becoming an atheist radically changed their lives for, well, the better, and their personal lives for the better, their morality for the better. They became better people because of not believing in God anymore. So I guess that makes atheism true then as well. And if your methodology is one where competing ideas all lead to the truth, then that is not a good method to use. So the group or the religion or the cult or the whatever that you credit for the change that you've made in your life doesn't mean that that group's claims are true. This isn't evidence of anything at all. This isn't critical thinking. It isn't skeptical. And it isn't a way to get to know what is true or real. It is equivalent to, well, I took this pill and it made me feel great. So therefore, this pill will make everybody feel great. Well, that is a appeal to the minority of one. Just because it made you feel good, it doesn't necessarily mean that will make anyone else feel good. And even if it did make a large amount of people feel good, that doesn't necessarily mean it's good for you. So we need to study the claims independently of how it makes you feel. Now, how much of a changed life are we talking about here? And what evidences that change? Again, this methodology completely breaks apart under any scrutiny that you could provide, even a little bit. So, like, what do you mean by changed life? That's kind of important to establish. What do you mean improve? What do you mean by better life? Do you mean less sickness? Do you mean more health? Do you mean a longer life? Do you mean more enjoyment? What do you mean by that? And again, how do you know that it's not just being around other people versus not being around people? How do you know what is it about that group that changed your life? How do you know that reading this and this scripture is what caused this change and not actions or inactions that you took? And some people in religions will fast for different periods of time. And that fasting may not be good for them, although some people will claim it can be very good. And I don't know. Does stopping eating help you in some way? Or are those benefits limited or whatever? But they will fast as part of a religious ritual. And this will keep them at a decent weight. And so then they will say, well, joining this religion helped me to stay healthy. And to some degree, they are kind of right. But maybe not eating at all is kind of bad for your health in the long run, even though it has a short-term positive effect. So the multiple things that come into play would each have to be examined and then linked to the outcome to show a positive correlation and association that is really going on to prove that this system does this thing that is a positive outcome. And then, of course, we'd still have to consider the fact that even if it was true that becoming a Christian fundamentally made your life better in every single possible way that it could be, that doesn't make the claims true. It just makes it beneficial. So this is not an argument, nor is it evidence. So that's one.
By transform life, we mean somebody whose life is broken in some sense and then is transformed by Jesus. Of course, we see this in the Bible when the blind man in John says, all I know is I was blind, but now I see.
Well, that's nice. So find me somebody that's actually blind and has been blind from birth and not just, they can't see at all. And then let's have them regain sight again through prayer or something, and have that be recorded and documented in a way that we can verify that it really happened. Oh, that doesn't happen. Right. Okay.
Someone's testimony or experience of transformation by God. The next category, I dubbed this one unique arguments. So these are arguments that one or two people held, and I kind of lumped them together. So J. Steve Miller, if you follow this channel, you'll recognize I've had him on a bunch of times to talk about near-death experiences. He's the only one that cited near-death experiences.
All right. Now, it's funny. NDEs, somebody brought up near-death experiences, and I've read metadata studies on NDEs, and somebody asked me what ones I read. And I'm like, it's been a while, so I don't remember which one specifically I read. There's a lot of them available online. There's a ton. And the results are, kind of what you would expect from these studies, broadly speaking. There are some that seem to have positive spins, but then there are those that say, look, the result is inconclusive. And I find the ones that say the result is inconclusive to be more honest than those that try to put a positive spin. And when you look at the authors that authored the metadata studies, you'll find if they are religious or not. And those that tend to be religious will tend to have a positive tilt to their conclusion, even though they're looking at the same data as a different group. So the main problem with this is, well, there's lots of problems, but first and foremost, what is death? And you might think, well, that's, of course, what do you mean, what is death? Everybody knows what death is, but not necessarily. The problem is hospitals have different ideas of what death means to them. And so doctors and that declare somebody dead will do so based on different criteria that hospital has set forth. And in the modern day, that might have come to an agreement, but as you go backwards in time, that's simply not the case. Heart failure was considered dead for a long time. Nowadays, it's more likely to be brain failure, but they don't always measure brain activity for various different reasons. So the heart is still used, even though that's not as good as brain activity. In fact, many hospitals, and as far as I'm aware, they still do this practice, maybe not all hospitals, but many of them, their morgue would have a string that hangs over the bed, so that if you woke up in the morgue, you could pull that string and get help, which is kind of creepy. I mean, imagine your first day on the job and you're going down there to the morgue, which is already in the basement, kind of creepy, kind of cold, and they see somebody sit up and and they pull the cord. That'd be great. Great horror movie. But yeah, doctors can be wrong about their diagnosis of dead, because if they're using just the heart, that's not necessarily a good indication. And even when they're using, if they have the brain hooked up, they're measuring the brain activity and that goes flat, the machine could be wrong. There might not be brain dead long enough to be dead. So what dead is not nailed down by these different institutions that have reported patient being dead. So that's one major problem, is that you can't even quantify who's dead, who really died, who almost died, and in what way they died. Or maybe they weren't dead. Then the other problem is, well, you're dealing with medical records. Medical records are kept very securely, which is a good thing, but bad for investigating any phenomenon that you might want to investigate. And so unless the person that is claiming the NDE has released those medical documents into the public, we don't get to access them, which means we're relying on hearsay. Whether it's them directly or the doctors or nurses that they talk to about their NDE, it's still hearsay. They're saying that this happened, and we're basing it off of that. That's not scientific. Then you have the problem of delayed reporting, where the report will come days or weeks after the event transpired. So maybe the patient mentioned to the doctor that they had this experience, and that influences the doctor to some degree, and now their memory is kind of altered, and so they remember it differently from what really happened, and et cetera, et cetera. So these NDEs are not well documented under scrutiny. And that is precisely what you must do if you are actually saying, hey, look, people report weird stuff happening when they're almost dead. That's interesting. That is a phenomenon worth looking into. But when you do look into it, you'll find that study after study has one or more of these flaws. And you can't just ignore that, because that means, well, now I don't know that I'm dealing with a legitimate case. Uh, and then the few rare studies that you might find where somebody actually said something that could maybe be verified, you can't verify those studies. So there was one I remember reading. I don't know if it was within a metadata study or if it was its own separate study. I don't remember. I'd have to dig and dig and dig for it. But the person said there was some sort of machine in the room. And while they were outside of their body, they floated over and happened to look behind the machine and got the serial numbers off the machine and remembered it. And then they told the doctor, well, again, hearsay and all this, and they're like, oh, the hospital administration didn't know that it even had a serial number, and it was the right serial number, and all these things. And it was like, this is great claims, but it's all happening way after the fact. We don't know if that machine was in the room. We don't have it, and what we don't have for any NDE, as far as I know, is video audio recording. Not there. So that would be a huge element. And finally, and for me, what the last straw is for these that I think is a case closed is the fact that some hospitals, not all, but some hospitals have decided after several NDE events, or they know about these, like, hey, let's see if we can test this. So they put up a piece of paper with tape on the ceiling, and on this side it's blank, but on the other side is written something. Now, if you're floating above your body, the thought is you can float into the ceiling, you could look through the ceiling and then read that piece of paper. And then you could report back on what that paper said. They could climb up there and see if you were right. Different hospital came up with a better test, which is put stuff inside of a box that's on a really high shelf and nobody knows what's in that box. So if you float outside your body, go look inside the box and let us know what's in there. We'll record what you said, and then we'll climb up and see if you're right. And if you are, then great. Now we have something. But none of those tests has ever come back with a positive result. That, to me, suggests that nobody has ever actually left their body. As far as what they're reporting that they experienced during the death, well, this varies from person to person, but it's usually, in fact, almost always, in fact, I don't even know that there is any counterexamples of this, but I'm being careful with my wording, that the person reports what their religion is expected to happen. They will report on religions that they are aware of, not religions that they've never heard of. So it's always either their own religion or a religion that is well known in the zeitgeist. And then we have the problem, well, the so-called tunnel of light. Well, pilots experience the tunnel of light as well. They're not dead. So this is something that happens with oxygen depletion. So we have a naturalistic explanation that doesn't require us to posit any non-natural explanation. So maybe when people are running low on oxygen, their brain starts to see this, well, tunnel of light thing. And then whatever happens with that, well, if their brain was truly dead, that's about as dead as you can get. And if they then say, well, during that time, I experienced X, Y, and Z, but they're only telling that when they've recovered. And so how do we know they experienced that anything during that time and didn't just experience it when they woke up? They had a dream before or they had a dream after. How do we know it's a real thing versus just a dream or a vision that they had? And so these NDEs don't prove diddly squat in my view.
Experiences. Now, I think this is a huge growing field more apologists need to lead into, but he's done some amazing work on that. Trent Horn, a Catholic apologist, was the only one who said contingency. Now, this is a kind of causological argument, but it moves from the existence of contingent things like the universe that didn't have to exist, as saying the best explanation for its existence is a necessary being.
Precept. I hate precept. Precept breaks all the rules of logic. You cannot posit a necessary being without an example of a necessary being. In fact, why even say being in the first place? Why not just say necessary force? A necessary force, again, you want to posit a necessary force, you need to know that there is at least one necessary force. Is any force fundamental to the nature of reality? Well, we're talking the universe we know about, right? Gravity, maybe? Is that a necessary force? Well, in our universe, yes. Our universe couldn't be without gravity. But is that true for every type of universe? Bleeped if I know. So could it not exist? Don't know. Maybe, maybe not. What is the true nature of reality? Bleeped if anybody knows. And this guy's saying, well, you have to have a necessary being. Why don't you need to have a necessary force? Why impose being? That's anthropomizing a force. If you can do with a force what you could do with a being, force is more likely, since we know that forces are part of nature, and being only arises due to complexities found in nature. In fact, the only beings that we're aware of is, well, us, then, well, other animals, but for a moment we're only talking about human beings. We have this thing in our head called a brain that allows us to have what we call a mind, which is essentially an emergent property of the fact that our brains are so weird and squished together and folded and all that. Other creatures also have brains, and they can have different levels or types of consciousness and awareness of the world, and they can manipulate the world at different levels, and we can learn a great deal. And plants don't have brains, but they seem to get along just fine. And some creatures lose their brain to become a plant. And I don't know if that's ever gone the other way around, where a plant will become a creature, but there's at least one sort of fish or some weird creature that will lose. I'll have to find it if you want me to, but it loses its brain in order to become a plant. Really weird. But jellyfish don't really have brains as such, but they work just fine. So the complexity that a brain requires you to have a physical substrate of some sort. At least every brain that we've encountered. We've never encountered a mind that is disembodied from a brain so far. That would be extraordinary, but we just haven't done it. Now, if you look at the complex system of the Earth as a whole, and you're trying to see some emergent pattern, maybe the planet is alive in some sense. The planet is a body or a mind of some sort, but it's not exhibiting behaviors in that sense. So even though it is certainly complex, the emergent patterns of a brain simply don't generate from that complexity, because in some cases that doesn't happen. Well, you could say the solar system, there's all these planets and they move around, so couldn't they be like neurons in the brain? I don't think so, but if you wanted to posit that, then you'd have to show that these things do in fact generate something that could be called a mind. And, well, okay, now you're at a very interesting, weird, stellar mind, but you're still dealing with physical entities. So any agent would have to be constructed from, as far as we know, extraordinarily complex physical entities in order to be a being in the first place. But the being that he's, of course, referring to is sort of like a human, but has abilities that people don't have. The God being can do anything at all. anything by just wanting it to be. It just wishes it into existence, and it exists, and wishes it into non-existence. It is a magical being, if I've ever heard of one. It is not the sort of being that we've ever encountered or seen or verified in any way, shape, or form. It sounds made up, probably because it is. Sounds like a superhero on steroids, again, because it kind of is. But there's no example of this being. So there is no necessary agent without agency. And agency, as far as we can determine, is a property of complex systems working in tandem to form the emergent properties that would become a mind. So God, if it existed, would have to be physical. But they claim that God isn't physical. And they claim that God is extraordinarily smart. But then they'll claim that God is simple. One person I talked to ages ago said that God was made out of God. What is God made out of? Well, it's soul or spirit, but how does that work, mechanically speaking? If these are component pieces that make up what God is, then they'd have to be extraordinarily sophisticated to make up its brain, that would make up its mind for it to be a being in the first place. So now you're positing something with extraordinary sophistication to explain the universe, but now you have to explain that being. And you're saying it's just is because it has to be. But no other being has that property that we know of. So why are you granting it to this being? Because you want to, and for no other reason. This is an unnecessary extrapolation based upon essentially you don't know how things work, therefore it must be magic, basically. This is a non-hypothesis and a unwarranted conclusion based on complete misunderstanding of what it means to be a being in the first place. And of course, positing a necessary anything would require an argumentation that we simply don't have here. It is simply asserted that there must be something necessary because there's things that are unnecessary. Well, why wouldn't that thing be a force as opposed to a being? And it's far more likely that it would be a force, given that forces govern the known universe. So if you wanted to do deductive reasoning, even though I would suggest against it because deductive reasoning doesn't necessarily apply to the universe and nature as we understand it. But if you wanted to, then you'd have to say, hey, look, the universe is behaving all these laws of itself as it forms. And these things have certain behaviors that they exhibit. And so then anything that comes before that should also have those behaviors. Why would it be suddenly completely different? So the necessary force then becomes something that is like everything else, unnecessary. So then there is no necessary force because you don't need one to get things started. So everything is unnecessary. Nothing had to be anyway. But isn't it interesting, though, if we did consider the necessary being and say, well, it couldn't help but be there. So God has no choice but to exist? I thought God was all powerful. Couldn't God decide to stop being God? Couldn't God decide to retire? Could God give its power away? No, of course not. Because reasons. This is an evidence of God.
Now, two people, Mary Jo Sharp and Ruslan KD, said the argument from reason. And there's different versions of this that C.S. Lewis and Alvin Plantinga gave, but it's basically a move from the reliability of our cognitive faculties to understand truth in the world to the best explanation being not some naturalistic blind process, but that we were built to understand truth in a certain fashion. There's some other arguments.
Okay, so So that's kind of one of those doubt evolution things that C.S. Lewis and others popularized and is still going around today. That, well, if you're just evolution and stuff, you can't really trust your brain. Well, even if there's a God, you still can't really trust your brain. So it doesn't help us to posit God then. Because, yes, our sensory inputs can fail. And they can be wrong about the external world, which is what real and true is. But yes, the natural forces that got us to this point had to know what was real because you wouldn't survive if they didn't. So, well, it doesn't matter what you're running from as long as you're running from something, sure, but knowing what that thing is enhances your survivability. So being able to detect it and visualize it correctly enhances your survivability. Therefore, your eyesight's going to be decent enough, if not very good, to be able to detect the difference between a bear and a cheetah. Because they act and behave differently, and they are different. But if either one is chasing you, of course, you would, well, try to flee and get away and hide somewhere or do something. And of course, if you're running with your friend, trip your friend. But that might not work because it might actually chase after the one that keeps running and ignore the one that isn't. So I don't know what the bleep you're supposed to do. It depends on the creature. But at any rate, our faculties have emerged from a long line of people that lived and died because they were trying to find their way to survival. And that means recognizing what is true or what is real, because usually if you don't survive long. Now, in our day and age, and running up to our day and age, as you get into the modern era, if you go back to the 1900s before then and so on, you'll notice that people allowed other humans that otherwise would have perished to live lives. There's a group of Inuit or Eskimos that used to put their elderly on an piece of ice and set them off to drift off to go die, which sounds pretty brutal, but it's like, look, we can't take care of you. We don't have enough food to go around. So this is like we're not going to just kill you, but we're basically killing you. But you're going to go die somewhere we can't see you. Sorry, bye, love you, bye. Very, very brutal, but yeah, it helped them to survive. But we don't do that anymore. We keep our elderly around, perhaps longer than we should in many cases, because if the person is suffering, their quality of life is non-existent. Why keep them around? Just because you don't want to let them go? That's pretty selfish. But regardless, we enable certain humans to survive and thrive that otherwise would have perished if left to their own devices. So we impose a control over others' ability to live that nature alone wouldn't necessarily do because of our complex ways as humans. All this to say that none of that makes any sense if we have none of that matters in terms of whether there's a heaven or a immortal being that made us all or not. Like, why wouldn't you just let your person die? I mean, there's a better life waiting for them. Why wouldn't you just kill them? Get it over with. Why live a long life? Just be like, hey, okay, we hit the age of, I don't know, 88. Once you hit 88, that's it. You're done. We kill you. End of story. Doesn't matter what you're doing or what you're working on or what you're going to do. Don't matter. Your time has come and we kill you. Man, that would suck. So I personally would get on a plane, and that way I'm always 1 hour before I hit 88. Yeah, that will show them. But at any rate, we don't behave that way. But this is just well, you can't know if it's true unless there's some supernatural force. But that's not the case. We still can't necessarily know what is true. And if there was a supernatural force, well, then how do we know that God isn't messing with us so that we see what God wants us to see? How do we know that evil forces aren't messing with our sensory inputs? You wouldn't know. So it doesn't resolve anything. This is the non-argument. And he made it just kind of off the cuff and passed by it real fast. But thank goodness it's a minority argument. It's stupid, and it's not it's not evidence for anything. Neither is it a good argument.
Transcendental argument, consciousness, and the argument from desire that people gave as well. Now, the third category, this was given by 15 apologists that I asked, and this is basically the evidence for Jesus. So this could be the life, the teachings, the impact, or the miracles of Jesus. They consider the best evidence for God. Now, this first one, let's say the least surprising thing in this entire study is, of course, Gary Habermas, who's probably studied the resurrection as much or more than anyone who's ever lived, said, drum roll, the resurrection. But Catholic.
How exactly do you study the resurrection? What the hell are you studying exactly? Because there's only, 3 accounts of the resurrection in the Bible? Doesn't take that long to read those accounts. Like, what is there more to study? That's it. You're done. You learn the languages. Hebrew and Gaelic is not the right language. My brain said Gaelic. That's not it. I'm gonna stick with Gaelic though. It's Gaelic now. I don't care what don't correct me in the comments. It's Gaelic now. You learn Gaelic because why not? And Hebrew and I don't know, whatever, Jewish language, that is Hebrew, but I'm going to call it Judaism. You learn the language Judaism now because I don't know what languages are anymore. You learn all those languages and then you study it in that. Okay, that's it. You're done. Like, how do you keep studying the same thing? There's nothing more to study. Like, you're done. It can't possibly take more than a couple hours at best to read through that. Like, I don't know what you're studying. What are you studying? There's nothing to study. What other people said about it? Like, oh, look, he came back from the dead. Oh, look, he came back. Remember when they said he came back from the dead? Like, reading, like, what churches wrote to each other back in the day? And be like, hey, look, they wrote each other a letter that said, hey, isn't it cool that we believe that Jesus came back from the dead? Hey, look, I studied the resurrection. What a weird thing to study. How do you do it? It doesn't make sense. Please explain it to me. Okay. All right. Sorry. Anyway, so you've wasted your time and energy studying something that doesn't take that long to read through these 3 accounts that, hey, he came back from the dead. Okay. How do you know that? Because it said in the thing, it said it. Oh, okay, so the book said the thing. Okay, cool. So then the lobster is God. The lobster original deity is, in fact, the real deity because it said so in the book. Yeah. And you could study that. You could spend years studying the lobsters. Nobody's refuted the lobsters. Hey, you, I see you. You're a skeptic, right? Do you have a YouTube channel? You do? Well, then I dare you to refute the lobsters. Oh, yeah. Debunk it. See if you can. You won't. You're too scared, aren't you? What do you mean it would be pointless and silly and nobody but me would care about it? Do it anyways. Nobody will do it. That means it's right. One of these days, I'm going to convince somebody to debunk it. And then I'm just going to be like, they did it. And then I'll say, instead of saying this, I'll be like, hey, there was that one time when the person tried to debunk it, but they failed. And then I'll complain about that, I guess. But until then, I'm going to do it this way, which is much more funny. What was I talking about? Oh, right, the video. So this is the Bible said it. That's not evidence of anything other than you believe the Bible. Why should I believe the Bible? The resurrection isn't a thing you can study. It's a story that people told. That's it. There's nothing more there. Why would you believe it? I don't know. Not an argument, nor is it evidence of anything.
Catholic apologists Stephanie Gray Connors and Stuart Conneckley also specifically said the resurrection. Now, interestingly enough, my father, Josh McDowell, was the only one who responded with fulfilled prophecy. Now, he's made a case for the scriptures and the resurrection, but fulfilled prophecy being the most compelling evidence for the existence of God.
Okay, let's talk about fulfilled prophecy. All right, so first of all, how do you know what a prophecy is when it is said? What methodology is used here? So you go back, I don't know, Isaiah, and Isaiah says a bunch of stuff. And sometimes he's prophesying. But how do we know? How do we know that he's saying things about the future? I don't know. You got to have a method. See, the problem is you have the full book, so you already have the spoilers. You already know what's going to happen, right? So if you went in pretending like you didn't know what was going to happen, right, you could probably do it. You're a smart person. And you read Daniel. Daniel's got tons of prophecies in it, right? Supposedly. Well, when you encounter something that is said in Daniel, and you go, and you're pretending not to know that it's a prophecy, what things are said that allow you to know it's a prophecy? So you would have to have some methodology to determine this thing is a prophecy that he just said. Now, maybe it's obvious, like he read the king's dreams or whatever. That was like prophecy, right? Like, your next year you're going to have grain in your barn. Next year you're not going to have grain in the barn, or whatever the bleep it was. I don't remember now. But anyways, something like silos or whatever. They'd feed people. They'd starve or whatever. So he could prepare that. Although there's a problem with that, but I'll get to that in a moment. But nonetheless, okay, that's definitely he's saying something will happen in the future. But other points, how do I know that it's a prophecy? How do you know that it's a prophecy being made at that time? That's a huge problem. Is without that methodology, you don't have anything other than, well, they said it was a prophecy. Who said? They did. Who? The rabbis? The Gentiles? Oi! I don't know. But then we have the additional problem. If we're going to talk about prophecies, I'm going to listen to the Jews first, because they wrote, they have the Torah, right? Well, they wrote it, but So they'd be the ones I would listen to for what are prophecies and what aren't. And their prophecies are not always the Christian prophecy. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. So that's a problem. And then you go ahead and go, well, okay, fine. We're going to ignore all those problems. We're just going to look at the New Testament and what it says. Jesus did so-and-so, and this fulfills a prophecy made in blah, 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 blah. And you go, okay, let me go look at that. Okay. Oh, yeah, sure looks like it. Now, Matt Slick, good old Matt Slick, whose everything is at fault for, he loved to read this one bit, I think it's from Isaiah, where it's like the pierced person, they'll be pierced and there'll be all these things, terrible things will happen, and that's Jesus. But if you keep reading it, turns out it's Israel, not Jesus. But you're supposed to stop reading here. Like, you read from here to here, and that's prophecy, but the rest isn't prophecy. And you're supposed to know that somehow. But the problem I have, well, again, with all these problems set aside, the additional problem I have is whoever wrote the Bible knew what the Old Testament said. So what is to stop that person from saying, I really like that Jesus guy. You know what would be cool? If he rode on 2 donkeys. Because I remember that in the Bible. So I'm going to say that he rode 2 donkeys, and that fulfills this prophecy over there. There you go. And I just put it in there. Nothing's going to stop me from doing that. So how do I know that the Bible authors didn't just say that Jesus did X, Y, and Z? And then say, well, he fulfilled these prophecies because we said that he did. It's not impressive that a book that came after the prophecy can then pretend to fulfill the prophecy. Plus, there's prophecies that have failed, and there's prophecies that still haven't come to be. So those are additional problems. But we're just going to ignore all that because, whatever. So this isn't evidence, nor is it a good argument for anything at all. Oh, well.
And of course, there's a number of other wonderful apologists that point to Jesus. The next category is the moral argument. There's different versions of the moral argument, but it's basically a move from the existence of objective morality that we all know and see and expect others to follow.
Okay, so talking about this again. So this is presupposition with extra steps, and this is listen. This is really key to understand what I mean by this. The moral argument is presup with extra steps attached. And presup you recognize as being invalid, I hope, because you just assert God exists. You say without God, logic is impossible. And you want to make an argument? How are you going to do that? Using logic? I guess I won then. It's like you can't play Monopoly unless you recognize that Moneybag, what's his name? Professor Moneybags? Whatever his name is. I don't know. The Monopoly guy. I'm going to name him Silly McPants guy. Silly McPants guy must exist unless for do you want to play Monopoly? Yeah. Well, then you're admitting that Silly McPants exists or whatever. That's presup. Okay. Moral argument basically says you can't say what's good or bad morally unless there's a God. So it's the same thing, it's just extra steps. Objective morality isn't a thing. The only way I think you could do that is to say ethical system A, your morals point to ethical system, making them objective in that sense that they are pointing to a goal. But the way you get to that goal is subjective because it depends upon variables that you're going to encounter. So let's say you took legal ethical system, the legalism as an ethical standard, where just obey the law. That's it. If it's against the law, you don't do it. If it's not prohibited, you can do it. So you know that crossing the street at anywhere but a crosswalk is against the law. Well, different places have different ordinances regarding that, but whatever. So you cross at, if there's no crosswalk, you at least cross at the corners or whatever, or you've looked into it and you're like, I can cross this place at this time under these conditions, whatever, all that because you really care about upholding the law, right? But although you're going to cross the street and it's completely legal for you to do so, lo and behold, a car is coming and they don't look like they're slowing down. So now the objective, although it is you want to cross the street, you're legally permitted to do so, is going to be subject to the fact that this car is barreling down. And if you cross the street, you're going to be in front of that car. And then soon you are going to be in the air and regretting very much of everything before you go splat. And probably don't regret anymore because you will be very dead. So you can't cross the street even though you are allowed to in your ethical guideline because the events have transpired to present you with a situation where doing so would be unwise. So it's objective in a sense, but it's still subjective to events that play out. So is it objective or subjective? It's both. Yeah. Now what are you going to do, apologists? If morality is both objective and subjective, then where goes your argument? Poof. But always in these discussion, ethics is never talked about for some reason. I don't really know why, but I notice that whenever the moral argument is brought up, they never talk about ethics. The only ethical system that the apologists could possibly hold to would be divine command theory. Do what God tells you to do. Whether or not you want to do it doesn't matter. Whether or not you think it's bad doesn't matter. If God says to do it, you do it. And if God says to not do it, you don't do it. Period. End of story. No ifs, ands, or buts. No room for questioning. Pure obedience to the system. If that is your ethical framework, then you can't really say that your actions are good, only that they are dictated. You can claim God is good, but you would have to then demonstrate that God is good. And good would have to have a coherent meaning that applies to all humans. But we notice that not all humans behave in ethical ways that we agree with, or in moral ways that we agree with. So does that mean God doesn't exist then? I mean, the Islam religion, that whole religion, where they worship Allah and all that, they would be very happy to kill off non-believers if allowed by Sharia law, because apparently Sharia law is kind of part of the religion, depending on which version of the religion you're part of, I guess. But regardless, that's not good for me or anybody else that isn't a Muslim or in that religion, at any rate. So they're behaving in ways that they think are objective, but I disagree with. Well, now what happens, right? So there's no way to determine what group of humans we listen to in order to extrapolate what the objective morals are even in the first place. And saying we all know is a claim of knowledge. Do you know every single human in the entire world? No. And also, we do have counterexamples. We have counterexamples of people in prison that didn't seem to know that it was bad to kill somebody, or they didn't care. And we have some people that you can refer to as sociopaths, and not a psychologist, so I might get this wrong, but they don't appear to know that it is wrong to kill somebody, just that it's illegal to kill somebody. But they don't feel those feelings. So isn't that a counterexample that we all know this? So this isn't an argument of anything, and as such, must be discarded. But even if we ignored all those problems, even if you could absolutely somehow prove objective morality, that wouldn't mean there's a God. You still have to prove God, which you're not doing in that argument. You're just tacking on God at the end.
To the best explanation being a moral law giver. So the moral law points towards a moral law giver. So this is actually 23 people gave this. Now this first one, no surprise, Paul Copan, who's been one of the most able and consistent defenders of the moral argument for God today, but also Wes Huff, Gavin Ortland, the one and only Greg Kokel. We've got a UK apologist in here, Justin
Bunch of names I'm not familiar with.
Brierly, and Nate Sala also point towards the moral argument. The number one category, and you could probably know what it is by this point, 52 of the apologists I asked said creation. Now, some
52 apologists use circular reasoning. That really doesn't surprise me, I guess. But it kind of hurts for some reason. It's like, yeah, 52 apologists said circular reasoning. Wow. What nonsense. Creation is evidence of a creator. That's nice. You got evidence that it's a creation? Well, no. But we have bad arguments. Just pathetic. This is the best this is the best they have. Circular reasoning. That's the best they've got. My brain hurts. I don't mean to yell. I don't know why I'm yelling. I don't know. Oh, well, whatever.
Some just said creation in general. Some said like the cosmological argument. Some said fine-tuning, the origin of life. But something about creation pointing towards a creator was the number one response.
So circular reasoning. That's it. Just, well, of course it's created. We call it a creation, so it must be created. Moronic.
Creation refers to a bunch of different particular aspects of the universe that seemingly point towards God. So
seemingly. Black holes point to God. The sun. Does Jupiter point to God? I know what planet really points to God. Come on. You know what planet I'm thinking of. Come on. What planet points to God? You're right. It's Saturn. Saturn points to God. What? I don't get it. Uranus. Why would I say that? Oh well.
the Klom cosmological argument.
No, not the Klom with however many damn fallacies it has. All right, time to dig up my old video, I guess. All right. There it is. All right. Guess I'll just link that. There you go. I've done it. I did this already. It's called, I labeled it the KCA. It's got fallacies. Got a bunch of them. I hate it. It's not a good argument. It's not even an argument for God. It's just an argument that things have causes. It's an argument that is a special pleading argument. There's so many fallacies in the Klom, it's not even funny. But anyways, okay, whatever.
It points to the beginning of the universe, to there being a beginner.
Which it not only does it fail on proving that there is a beginning of the universe, it also fails at actually proving that points to anything. That's not the function of it. Even William Lane Craig said the Klom isn't meant to point to God, that it requires other arguments to get to God. So, yeah, it's not a good argument. It's fallacious, and it's not evidence. Notice how everything he mentioned is nothing more than an argument. There's no evidence at all here. I'm just saying. That's amazing.
So whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Fine-tuning points towards certain.
All right, and then the fine-tuning. Oh, boy. Yeah, no, this is pointing it backwards. It's assuming that everything was tuned for life rather than life is tuned for the universe. The fact is that the majority of the universe is inhospitable to life, and even many places on Earth are inhospitable to life. But all it does is say, well, if things were different, then things would be different. That's it. It never actually justifies any of its things. And then goes from the extrapolation that, well, it's all fine-tuned for life, therefore God. How did you get to that conclusion? Because it's really improbable that it would be tuned for life. Based on what?
Certain laws of physics and cosmology that exist within a very narrow range.
It's not as narrow as you think. There's actually a wide variety of range. It's about one. I think it's one in a. It was a big number. It wasn't a million, but it was 100,000 some odd. And I used ChatGPT to calculate it way back. I don't remember now, but there was a lot of factors that it could wiggle room. It might be fun to poke GPT again with it as part of this video. Not that it would prove anything. No, I'm not going to do it. Not going to do it. All right.
The slightest change in those numbers would make the universe inhospitable to life.
Again, no, you can change a lot of these numbers and you would still have our type of life, but of course, it ignores the fact that you could have other types of life. Now, some of these variables, if you change them, then you might not even have a universe anymore. And some of them, well, we think that you wouldn't have life anymore, but we don't know because, as far as I know, no simulation has been performed on all these other universes that could have been to demonstrate that no life is possible in those universes. So it's just an empty claim, making this a non-argument.
So the fine-tuning seems best explained by a fine-tuner. Others would be the origin of life, the amount of DNA you find in a cell, the complexity of information points towards a mind or an author of life. Now,
the complexity in DNA points to that DNA is complex, but complexity is actually not a feature of design. It's a feature of incompetence. Look at your computer. All right, well, not the outside. I mean, okay, what makes that work, right? Like little ships and stuff, right? Now, do you add more stuff to your computer that you don't really need? You know, maybe. Let's add an alarm clock. Okay. Let's add a coffee maker. Let's add a television set. Let's add more components to it. Now, here's the problem. If those components are tied in directly to the CPU, the more components I add, the more likely the CPU is going to crash because it can only handle so much. The more complexity I add to my system, the more likely it is that my system will fail. Same thing with a car. If you overcomplicate the engine, well, then there's more things that can go wrong with it. The more they overthink the plumbing, the easier it is to stop up the drain. One wise man once said that. Anyways, so simplicity is the hallmark of design, not complexity. But if you're looking at DNA and going like, wow, you just don't understand evolution. Like, yeah, okay. Yeah, you got 4 different acids there. Neat. Okay, and they do stuff. Okay, and it doesn't mean God. It's just how things are doing stuff. But, they're banking on that you don't really know that much in order to get to their conclusion. They're hoping that you're ignorant. But I know that you're not because you're listening to Deconverted Man, which means you're very smart.
this first one will not shock you at all. Of course, William Lane Craig, when he looked at me with a little smirk and he's just like, cosmological. The Kalam argument, of course. But 2 others kind of surprised me. J. Warner Wallace and Lee Strobel, who both...
Oh, those charlatans. Fuck those idiots. Anyways.
2 of their first influential books kind of investigating the historical Jesus. Both said the Kalam cosmological argument is the single best piece of evidence for God.
Wow. So the 2 forerunners of being complete and utter frauds think that the worst argument that you have is okay, when I say the worst, I just don't like it. I mean, it's not, there is no worst. All the arguments suck. So actually, you know what? I do think that I made a tier list of the arguments. So let's see. Oh, yes, here it is. I did make a tier list. Let me show you here. Let's see. So here we go. As you can see, nothing on S rank, nothing on A rank, B rank, C rank, D rank, F, negative F minus rank, Aquinas 5 ways, cosmological argument, ontological argument. Screw it. All the arguments for God, sticky out tongue emoji. So yeah, they all suck. They all are terrible. Because in logic, there is no best or worst argument. There's only a sound argument or an unsound argument. And for whatever reason, I can't figure out, apologists have nothing but unsound arguments. It's kind of what I've dedicated my entire channel to, exposing. these arguments helped in part to deconvert me. Yeah. See, I memorized the Kalam and other arguments that they made, and I thought, hey, these are great. But then, stupidly, I learned informal logic. That was a mistake, because then I was like, oh, damn, these arguments suck. And anybody that learns informal logic, I don't know how they could come to a different conclusion. I guess some have. But I've questioned apologists lately and been questioning them for a long time about whether they know informal logic or not. And it seems that, like, I don't know anybody that does. This one guy I encountered, he knew formal logic, but it didn't seem like he'd interacted with informal logic even a little. He was aware of it, but he didn't seem interested in it. Why? I don't know. But informal logic would be what you would have to use to know if these arguments are sound or not. But he cared about the validness of his argument, which only matters in formal logic. Well, it matters in informal logic too, but he was like, it's sound, or it's valid, it's valid. I'm like, yes, it's valid, but it's not sound. And he didn't understand why, even though I pointed it out to him how it was fallacious multiple times. And when I asked him and pressed him on informal logic, he was like, oh, I don't know about that. So I don't know why apologists don't seem to know informal logic. I'm waiting to encounter the apologist that actually knows informal logic. That would be interesting. But at any rate, these arguments are not sound. And I lost the thing. Here we go. Oh, there it is.
Nancy Piercy agreed. This one slightly surprised me. Titus Kennedy, who's an archaeologist, specifically said the Kalam. Hillary Ferrer with Mama Bear Apologetics, she goes, that's easy. And she didn't just say creation, she said protein and protein synthesis. That was very specific. You, Ross, no.
Wait. How is that evidence of God? Protein and protein synthesis is evidence of protein and protein synthesis. How is that evidence for God? You're missing something there, namely an argument. So
No surprise, said fine tuning. And Bible teacher YouTuber Mike Winger also said creation. And
okay, that idiot. I know that guy. He's an idiot.
Again, there's a bunch of other amazing apologists that pointed towards creation as the best piece of evidence.
Yeah, 47% of apologists are all morons. Cool. The rest are also morons, but they all are using circular reasoning. That's amazing. Well, thanks for letting us know. I gotta send this video out, man. Other people gotta tackle this video too. We need more people talking about how broken these arguments are. Cover the science, cover everything about it, because this is great. He saved me a lot of time and trouble. I think I'm gonna retire after this. No, I'm not going to, but I could. I mean, this is it. This is all the arguments they have. This is the best that they can offer. 100 of the best arguments that we have. I mean, evidence that we have. By evidence, they mean crap arguments. Yeah. Nothing. Just nothing. I'm going to send it to Bitch Blog and R and Raw. I'm going to send this video to everybody. Everybody's going to get this video that I know that I can email if I feel like doing that. I might not do it. I don't know. Who knows at this point what I'll do. You know what? You're probably wondering, Deconverted Man, what the hell are you doing? Get back to the video. And you're right. I should get back to the video. But let me take a moment to just do this. Okay, now I'll get back to the video.
I thought it was interesting that two apologists that I just respect and love and have had on this program didn't answer or wouldn't answer my query. But I think there's wisdom in why they don't. Os Guinness said, quote, the best argument is the best argument for the specific person.
I don't know, whatever the argument that they like is the best one. I mean, moronic.
In other words, there is no best argument. There's a lot of wisdom in that. Instead of saying, here's what I think is the best, I'm going to force it on you, is finding what's interesting for a person.
So the whole video was pointless then.
And try to prevent something that might be compelling to them. Doug Grotai said, I cannot do that. Too simplistic. It depends upon what best means. I'm a cumulative case guy, so I think we need several to make the case. Now, that didn't surprise me because Doug is a careful philosopher and
careful philosopher. Oh, man, those careful philosophers. You got to appreciate those careful philosophers. I hate those accident-prone philosophers, always slipping on Aquinas' ladder and falling down St. Augustine's stairwell and tripping over the well of Theseus that may or may not be a well anymore because it's been built and rebuilt so many times. The accident-prone philosophers. Fuck those guys. I like the careful philosophers. What a moronic. The careful philosopher. That's going to be the thumbnail of this video right there. That's got to be the thumbnail. It's me doing that. What do you mean get back to the video? Look. Do I have to put the lobster back on my head? I'll do it.
Wanted to nuance things, but there's something to be said. I actually think most apologists in this group would agree that it's not just one argument. It's the weight of different arguments, philosophical and moral and experiential and historical, that point towards the existence of God and
No, they don't. Not even a little. Every single one of those arguments has one or more logical fallacies. And many of them are pseudoscientific in nature and ignore or outright reject science at some fundamental level. The proton and proton synthesis, for example, seems to be some sort of, a pseudoscientific view of reality. The DNA thing, that's definitely pseudoscientific. And then, of course, if we're all just accidental chance, that's another pseudoscience sort of stance. So these arguments are fallacious. They're not sound. And you didn't even present the arguments in full, so they're not even valid. Some of them you just alluded to rather than expand upon. Now, there's no real time limit. You could have done however long of a time you wanted to, but you chose to edit this down for, time constraints. So you would really think that you would want to present the best of the best, but, when all you have is crap, I guess all you can do is present crap. These arguments don't convince us skeptics because, we've heard them before. We've looked at them, we've analyzed them, and we've concluded that they're fallacious. You guys just don't care. Doesn't matter how many times the atheist, skeptic, whatever points out to you that these arguments suck, you keep making them. In fact, I found a couple of videos lately where theists were saying, this is a really bad argument for God. Why are you using it? They're like, I just wanted to present it or whatever nonsense they said. And it's like, yeah, but it's not a good argument. So why would you present it? That is a good question. Why would you put up something that's a bad argument? My thought is because people don't know what a bad argument is. And the only way that you or anyone else is going to know what a bad argument is learn informal logic. For the love of humanity, it's not that hard. If you need help, I'll help you as best as I can to learn it. So we don't have any empirical evidence in this video. We didn't have any valid and sound arguments. We didn't have anything in this video other than bad arguments for God, but that's pretty much come to be expected at this point. So, yeah, we have to be skeptical of this idiot's conclusion. That's it. See you next time. And until then, be skeptical. And after that, stay skeptical. And remember, lobster Why? Don't ask me why. Just because. Okay. This is how I'm ending the video. I'm done now. That's it. You can stop watching. I got nothing more to say. I'm out of entertainment value. Comment, like, and subscribe. But why is it? What happened? Why am I still streaming? Oh God, I'm stuck here, aren't I? This is it. This is the purgatory I was warned of. I knew one day it would come for me. The inescapable prison of being an online 24-hour content provider. Oh no! Oh no! Oh wait, there's a button.